And my name is Michelle Cobb. I'm the Executive Director of the Podcast Academy. Thank you for joining us today. I'm super excited to listen to our speaker, Chavi Sachdev, talk about many voices, planning, structuring, and producing your future podcast. She has been running a podcast consultancy workshop for a while, and she is rolling with us today despite some technical difficulties. So welcome and thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Apologies again for this. You might be able to see me. I may be more than a voice, hopefully during the duration of this webinar and tiny workshop. But for now, we're going to stick with the program and really just keep it to voice. So I'll be disembodied for a little bit. My my session today is about producing feature podcasts. And I thought I'd start with introducing myself first and giving you some of my chops. My name is Chavi. I'm in Mumbai. I have been making audio podcasts and audio journalism since 2008. So in India, I have the dubious distinction of being the oldest, but that makes me just sound really ancient. So I'm not quite sure. And also, there's of course a footnote, which is that I wasn't the first to start, but the person who started first has relocated to Japan. So I've taken that mantle over. I started with a monologue podcast where I would just talk about what was happening in radio. And at that point, it was supposed to open up to news radio. Indian radio is very different from radio in Europe or America. We have only Bollywood music, and news is not allowed on the radio. So podcasting was a very, very a crucial step for me because I had moved back from America where I was used to getting things like NPR news, quiz shows, and reviews and intelligent debate on radio and not just music, and that to Bollywood music. So I started to monitor radio, and then I went ahead and did this interview series with other Indians who'd moved back from America, made something called Bombay Talkies, which was my first feature podcast. And then, so that was about Mumbai and Soundscapes, also made the first music podcast out of India. And then I've made and produced podcasts for a bunch of different clients. One of them is my own company. We made the first love, sex, and dating podcast uh, way back. And I've also taught a lot of different types of organizations and individuals, as well as journalists, about switching or trying their hand at podcasting. So I've done a bunch of trainings and workshops. And for this one, I would really like to know how many of you are coming to this from a journalism background. Michelle, I'm going to lean to you because I cannot see the chat boxes right now to summarize that answer. But if any of you have journalism experience or are currently doing journalistic work, even if it's not a podcast, then this will definitely cover some things you already have experience with, because that's what I bring to this. And a lot of the podcasts I do are features. I do a bunch of stuff for the BBC as a correspondent, as a journalist, and most of them are about sustainability, environmental kind of stuff. And I go into the field a lot. That's what I absolutely love. And when I make podcasts, I try to push my clients very, very hard to move away from interviews and just talking heads to incorporate themes and give voice to people in the field. And if you're doing any sort of work that has impact, which if you're doing journalism right, it should, or if you're telling stories, there's something happening in the world, you want to include that to give listeners a sense of space and theme. And I really, really love doing that kind of work. So for those of you who are not from journalism and are experimenting with a different format to tell stories and bring in many voices to move a narrative forward, this is the session for you. Could I just get a summary of how many people have journalism experience or background?
If you put that in the chat box, if anyone has journalism experience, I think you got a lot of journalism newbies here.
Okay. Well, a follow-up question then. Have most of you mostly made interview podcasts where it's either two or a panel in discussion, and that's basically it, just the people talking to each other in real time, both narrative and conversational. Okay, I
Yes.
guess I.
Yep,
Okay.
mostly interview.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So even in interviews, there is the option to broaden it and make it more um, scenic in a way. I'm sure you've all heard people say things like podcasts are movies for the mind, and podcasts are empathy machines, and things like that, which are not really as trite as they sound because they are true. And when you have a podcast that transports somebody because they have seen in it, that's what I refer to as a feature. So in journalism, um, we talk about features in a certain way if you're coming from text or even TV. So let me break it down. It's more than just a conversation between two people. It's actually having things happen in a non-contiguous way, which you as a narrator present or you as a writer present. So in print, a feature is word pictures, sometimes contains commentary, is always well researched. The backbone for any feature is the interview. You're probably all doing interviews anyway. So this is what happens kind of next if you want to expand it a little further or make it happen with multiple voices that were recorded differently. In podcasts, which are also documentaries, that's when you have something that's sound rich, contains accurate, well researched info. Obviously, you don't want to be fictionalizing stuff in a documentary, and you're including multiple voices. So a feature can be 3 minutes long. If it's over 23 minutes, because we're borrowing from radio, it actually falls into the category of documentary. And this distinction only really matters when you're entering awards, because if you are a short form nonfiction feature, you go into the features category. If you're more than 23 minutes, you go into the documentaries category. But the techniques and the steps and the workflows are pretty much the same. So let me get into that for you. Again, all of these have interviews. They are sound rich and they have a bunch of stuff that's done non-contiguously. They are scripted. So that's really the difference between making a feature slash, I'm going to call them features rather than documentaries, rather than doing conversations, is that there is an element of scripting. You start with the interview, you have some sound or scene, and then you package it to present it like that. You also often have to narrate it in first person. And this is a beautiful thing about podcasts, as you know, because you are the lens through, or that's a visual analogy. Sorry, you are the filter through which people are listening and you sort of present it. So most of you have heard true crime podcasts, I'm sure, and a lot of those have been in this vein. So just a few off the top of my head that I have enjoyed are essentially features. Some of them are serialized, so they go over the story arc, takes several episodes to unfold, and all of these are on your screen right now, are serialized examples. And some are episodic, where each episode has its own start, middle, and finish. And all of these are excellent. The documentary podcast is reported from all over the world and has really, really good sound. And it's all of these, I think, are first person. People Fixing the World is more of a mixed show from the BBC, but again, it is delving into a subject with many, many, many voices. So I do a lot of work for People Fixing the World as an independent consultant, and I'm going to show you an example basically through the course of this presentation and this webinar on how I do it to break down my workflow for you. The other kind of way that happens is if you've got like a magazine format or you're doing a show that involves smaller features in it. And I do contribute to these, a health check in the world. And of course, This American Life, which has all these different acts. Some of them, sometimes they do a live performance, some of it is an essay or a reading, but oftentimes they are reported from the field and they are little packages, that's the radio term for it, for a small feature that fits in. So is serial a feature? What do you think? You can turn on your mics or you can put it in the chat box if you'd like.
To me, Serial was a feature, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay. It's a trick question.
I bet, yes.
What do you guys think?
I think now they're too afraid since I've answered wrong to put something in the chat box
No,
there.
it's not wrong. It's not wrong. I just feel like it's debatable because while there is scene and there is narration and it's opinionated sort of narration, a lot of it was also happening kind of in real time where they were incorporating things that were unfolding. But then they also went into these digressions where in one episode, for example, it was a long time ago. I don't expect you to remember all the different episodes of season one, but they flipped around. So in
Yeah.
one episode, I remember it was more like a profile. They really did like a instead of telling a story that was unfolding about a crime, they focused on one person and told their story in a feature style. And then they also branched out into like a criminal investigation. And then other like they spent a whole bonus episode having an interview with a lawyer. So I feel like they really played around with it,
Yeah.
and that's good. That's good. It also served as a really nice a sort of a gateway for people like me and podcasters like us because it introduced a bunch of different ways that you could treat your audio, and uh, and I think that was nice of them to just abandon the staid NPR playbook, which is so um, formulaic, and then mess with whatever they were finding as it was going along and involving all of us in it. So
That's true. I have
yes,
to say, I had not thought of that, but now that you lay that out, my memories of Serial are probably stronger because they use the different methods. So interesting.
yeah, yeah. So I was very grateful for them having done that. And the other thing I really appreciated was that they had a season. I think they were the first podcast to have a season, and that was a trendsetter for people like us. I had made 72 episodes of one of my podcasts without a break. That was insane. So coming back to features, uh, when you're starting to think, you have to obviously do a lot of prep work, and it starts with, of course, the story. What are you trying to do, and whom are you going to include in it, as well as, of course, where are you going to go, and this slide is very slow, sorry. And what kind of sound you're going to bring in to flesh it out, if you can. Of course, this is also a different world right now in 2021. And even for me, the tools I use are so restricted. But I have some workarounds if you can build them into your flow. So this you start with the first thing, which is what is your story? And if you break it down, basically any story, any conversation, any feature documentary that you want to make is that something happened to someone. Now you have to sort of back back pedal out of there and then figure out, really, I know this sounds insane because you're not building a business, but what is your mission and what is your vision in your podcast? If it's episodic or serialized, either way, what are you trying to do with this story? So for instance, you could be making a podcast series about othering people, and that could be your mission, and this drives what you're doing, and then the vision drives how you're going to do it. So okay, I'm going to do 8 episodes and I'm going to talk about people who are impacted, and I'm going to talk about the people who acted in a certain way but then maybe figured out how to change, and I'm going to talk to experts about why people are prejudiced, and I'm going to give people a way to acknowledge perhaps some tools, and then move on from it. Okay, so you could do that, whether it's going to be a 23-minute feature or 6 episodes where the narrative arc. This is a good exercise to do, even if it's just out loud with somebody who kind of gets it. Like, I wouldn't really recommend picking like your mom if she's not part of the podcasting industry, although that could also help, of course. Or, for example, a single episode where you're going to do a profile of somebody who really made a difference environmentally by recharging a lake. And you want to, this is my mission, this is my vision. So you figure it out so that it helps you also make a plan. This is actually what I'm going to give you an example of. These are all real, by the way. So there is a man who's basically started an NGO which has this pretty complex scheme to get healthcare to the workers in Bangladesh's factory, which is responsible. They're responsible for 70% of Bangladesh's GDP. And the vision is then that I want to break down whether it's actually working? Is it some sort of a silver bullet? Is it going to really fix all the problems? And why hasn't anybody thought of this before? And if it works, what are the implications? So figuring this out beforehand helps you then make the steps, the plan. What's already been done in terms of people covering this? Is this a dead story? If it's already been covered, then how can I add to it? Is it my activism? Is it my opinion? Is it the angle? Is it some new development that I'm going to share? Then, when you figure out what you're going to say, who are you going to include? Where are you going to be able to go to? And this is really a logistical problem. How and who are you going to be able to access? And is that going to be remotely? Are you going to be able to travel? All this needs to be assessed. If I do work for the BBC, there's like a 19-page risk assessment form I have to fill out. And of course, now in COVID times, it's just not happening. So we've worked out different ways of getting sound so that the documentaries still sound immersive and transportive. So once you figure out whose voices you need, it's nice to know in any story. So somebody did something to someone. You want to get the actor and you want to get the person who was impacted, definitely. Now, if there's a healthcare scheme, you want to figure out who's starting it and why, who's impacted or not impacted, and then all the other voices in the middle. Do I want the economic angle? Do I want the socio-political? What am I looking at? Is there a gender angle? What is my lens? Any story has so many ways to approach it, right? And what is your approach and whom do you need to talk to? And then really it's very helpful to make a list about, okay, the economist is going to add this to this story, or the doctor is going to add this part to the story. I need somebody to assess this. And then you can sort of divvy it up and go find those people. Um, Sorry, I don't know what happened here. Right, back on track. And then, I mean, this is a basic list of the kinds of people you want to involve, especially if you're doing a solutions kind of story, if you're doing solutions that are not just like this is a problem, but you want to examine angles that are positive. So you also get experts who can give context. And my starting point is generally the internet. And I look for news, of course, Google News. Google owns my soul at this point. And then also, depending on what kind of angle it is, maybe articles, maybe journal articles, policies, stuff like that. And if you guys want, we can also like spitball action plans for your podcast if that's something you want to do. I've done this before. Like for example, I've worked with somebody who was making a travel podcast where people would just tell an anecdote of where they'd gone or describe the architecture or something like that. And we worked out a way to incorporate sound. And then when their guests would go somewhere, so it's a co-hosted podcast, and they were just doing interviews about travel. So now when their guests were traveling, they would capture some audio, bring it back, and work it into sort of a two-way feature so that it could be more sound rich. So we could address that at the end when we have time for questions. So do we have any questions so far? I'm going to give you examples of the people I spoke to for a couple of different stories, podcasts.
If you've got a question, just go ahead and throw it into the Q&A box. It's a quiet crowd out there.
It's early.
It
I don't
is,
blame you guys. Yeah,
but late for you. So thanks for joining us at this time.
no problem. All right. So I'll tell you about my process for a couple of things. This was a very short 6-minute feature about, actually 7-minute feature about this man, Anand, who had single-handedly, he quit his job. I mean, he's quite exceptional. Quit a well-paying job to devote himself to rebuilding lakes. And so I figured, first, of course, I need to talk to himself. Then, like, should I talk to his wife, perhaps? I mean, this man has given up the stability of a job. He's got a family, he's got kids. Maybe nice to include his wife's opinion. Does she support him? Does she think he's bonkers? His boss, who's given him leave, he's on a sabbatical, actually. He hasn't quit, 5 years sabbatical, unpaid. And then I thought I'd speak to somebody who understands the ecology about lakes in general. Why have the lakes dried up? What is happening here? And what is he up against? And is this feasible? And of course, I have all the data behind this as well. There used to be 345 lakes in the area that he's working on, and now there are only 34. So it's an important thing he's doing. And then go to the village where the lake is and talk to the volunteers, talk to the people who thought this was absolutely outrageous. And then I thought I'd get vox pops, which is it's a short form for vox populi, uh, you know just voices on the ground at the lakeside. And I know that from having read about it and stuff, that people go there for a walk in the evening. It's become quite a nice little spot for people to chill out and hang. And now there are birds and there's water, when once there was fallow ground that people used to play cricket on. So this was the list I made after having read up on him and decided that it's going to be a profile, a feature about his work, but also with an ecological angle to it. Um, for the factory health insurance, I wanted to talk, of course, to the person who started the insurance scheme thing, and the factory workers with insurance, the factory workers without insurance. And then at the factory, why have they tried to do this? Who agreed to this? And then also I wanted to find out, has it made an impact? And then the factory owner, perhaps, or people in the medical profession, to see if they're seeing fewer illnesses. Maybe somebody from the labor union about why other factories have not started this. A social scientist to talk about issues of health and gender, and also a labor economist. Um, let me let me tell you a little bit about this story really briefly. It's actually a documentary because it's more than 23 minutes. So this social scientist, social entrepreneur came up with this idea that nobody wants to pay for health insurance, but because they don't pay for health insurance, they never go to the doctor. They don't have free universal health care in Bangladesh until they're very, very sick. And once they're very, very sick, they end up losing more time from work because they are day wage earners. So nobody wants to take a day off to go to the doctor. So they wait until they're massively beyond a point of no return, whatever it may be. And it affects their income, affects their health, of course, their all kinds of sociological issues. And most of these are women. 70%, 90% of the factory workers are women. So therefore, there's a gender angle, there's an economy angle, and a health angle. And I wanted to cover all of them because his scheme is quite smart. And it seems so smart, you wonder, why has nobody else done this? He started a store in the factory where you can buy everything from dish detergent to even clothing and rice and oil. And if you spend money, that it's cashless, it's done against your paycheck. And if you spend X amount of money for 3 months, your premium for the insurance comes out of that savings, because he's worked something out with the people, the brand supplying the goods. So it's not that simple. It's a little complicated, but it's quite elegant and it's really thought of everything. But then why is it not being used everywhere? And can it be? So these are the kind of things we wanted to get into. And this was my list of people who I wanted to talk to. You've made your list of people to talk to. And then you want to also figure out your tone. Are you going to stick with being a friend? Are you slightly more um, authoritative? Are you involved? Are you going to talk about your involvement in it, what you saw, how you observed it? And these things will then, of course, inform your script. And if you're doing it for somebody else, obviously, then they will sort of decide that for you. A lot of you, I think, are independent podcasters, so you get to decide. You're the boss. And obviously, if your podcast already has a tone and a theme, and you're looking to expand it, then that's the thing to think about, is how are you going to incorporate the sound, and where what it's going to sound like when you're presenting it. So one way of doing this is a two-way, and I will talk about that in a second. My computer seems to have restarted. Maybe we'll see if it's going to allow me back in. So I will, beg your pardon in a second and try to move there. Okay, now for sound, what are you going to be able to create or recreate in the story? What action is happening? For example, in the lake story, I had kind of hoped that there would be like ground digging or maybe big earth moving equipment or something. It turned out they were done with that and they were not going to be doing that again for a while. So that didn't work out. But I got lake sounds, I got bird sounds, and in a pinch, basically I got the sounds of us going to the lake, and then of course the people at the lake. This is pre-COVID, so I was moving around and talking to strangers in the outdoors. It was a different time, and obviously think about access. Okay, I've got. Can you guys see two screens now? What's going on?
Yep, we see you. We see you twice. So
All right. Okay. So, and I'm hearing an echo, which is not good.
we are getting an echo. Yeah,
Okay. Yes.
that's
I need to
better.
turn one off.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to try to play you sound from here. If it doesn't work, then I will switch to the other screen.
Okay, sounds
Hello,
good.
everybody. Now you can see me.
Thanks for your
Uh,
patience, everyone. That's the beauty of the virtual world. We're all sort of used to cats and dogs running across the screen and various technical fun.
all right. So for the lake, this is what I actually got. The village, the ride to and from, Ambi from the lake, people who are using it today, excavation did not happen. And for the health insurance one, I got a lot more sound because there was just a lot more going on. And then I had more time to tell my story. It's also, of course, more complicated story than the lake, or I made it a more complicated story. So this is what I thought I'd get: factory shop floor, the premises, and I had some ideas. And then I got so much more: the store, hospital, clinic, to check, what was happening, if there were fewer people, get the doctor sounding busy. And then I went to university. I knew I was going to meet an economist at the university. So that sound, we didn't end up using that though. It was boring. And then city to give place, because Bangladesh and Dhaka sound different than Boston and Berlin. So we did all that. If you can't go, there are ways around this. And I have done this. We ask the interviews to suggest sounds, like where is the action? And then they can record it for you on their phones. Phones have really good microphones these days. So we could do something with that. Like the travel podcast I was telling about, these guys don't have sophisticated equipment. They don't have recorders of good omnidirectional mics. They just use their phone and their phone recorder. So then if you're doing interviews, which you have to for any sort of podcast, I advise people to do a pre-interview, which helps you check in with the person you're going to be talking to, then also figure out the flow, the talking points. You get a sense of what they talk like, if they're very formal, if you need to warm them up with something. And I also ask them for other people I should talk to, other sources. And then you can schedule the interview or the visit. And then the next part is actually collecting the sound. So if you're in the field safely, being COVID careful, or post COVID with a vaccine or whatever, this is how it generally works. You get a mic that is quite long, and then you can also get far away from your interviewee, and you can point it at different things: cows, birds, tractors, things like that, and get nice sound. You can also use a field recorder, which then goes around with you rather than recording into your laptop. This is a Tascam that I use. A Zoom is a pretty good instrument as well. You can also plug in a microphone into the recorder. And then I always suggest you have over the ear headphones so you can monitor what you're recording. And if you're not going in with all of that, then a microphone with a phone app is really good. This microphone is the Shure MV8 and it has a headphone jack and with USB plugs into your phone and lets you get good sound wherever you are. Oh, I was clicking on the wrong thing. So this is my preferred equipment. And then when I'm out there getting color, I record everything for at least 1 minute each. And then I edit and I put it all together. And I've put in a little caveat there that noise is not color. So if you're doing interviews outside, you know that if a siren goes off or an ambulance goes off or there's a big boom, you can't take it out when you're editing. You just have to take a retake. And if you're looking for color, the same thing applies. Like you want it to be clean and you want at least a minute. You can also try stand ups. They really help bring a feature alive. And a stand up is basically when you record yourself in the scene, in a place. And if you don't know what to say, an itemized list is really good. Like I'm standing in the doctor's office and there are 5 shelves crammed with 8 levels of small green bottles. And people are making pictures in their head. You can describe what's around you. I was in Bangladesh for that story, for that podcast, and I was standing in a sunny spot recording that I'm on my way to get interviews with people who don't have the insurance. And then I spotted a snake, and I sound like a little girl because I'm still recording. I'm like, oh, there's a snake there, just basking in the sun. And I had a huge, I was sharing all my audio so everybody heard it. And then there was a vote, and they voted to keep it in. And I was massively embarrassed because I sounded like a shrill, shrieky child. But they were like, it's great color. And it really puts you there that there's a snake hanging out and nobody seems concerned. And this is not happening for most of us in our usual lives. So it stayed. That was, of course, not planned, but the other stuff is planned. And I'll play you example of that. But this is what I mean when I collect everything. I have 7 gigs of audio because I collected everything. So if you look there, you'll see Sam. And I come back home and I label everything. If it's not usable, I don't label it, but that's the only thing that is not labeled. So you'll see there's uh, machines, so many machines without music because they had music playing on the shop floor. Overlock machine, hemming machine, button machine, iron with steam, and then there's a floor stand up and stuff like that. I'm going to also play you this, but one of the things I was talking about is you can ask the interviewee to describe what we're seeing. And this is in the shop. Okay. Michelle, can you give me a permission to share my screen on my laptop?
Yes,
I
doing
don't.
that now. There you go.
All right. How do I mute myself on this?
Isn't it exciting in a world where we have multiple devices to be able to
Devices.
just move from one to another?
Confuse yourself completely. Yes. Okay. Nope, this is not letting me mute myself. Hmm.
I'm trying to mute yourself on the phone.
Yeah.
I can mute you.
Please do.
All right. Here we go. You're muted there. I'm asking to unmute on the computer. I've asked to unmute, but it's not clicking. Are you able to unmute yourself on the computer?
Yes.
There you go. All right.
I might have to unceremoniously leave you on my phone.
Yes, that's.
Okay.
I'm going to stop the video on your phone.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. I think we've gotten beyond this.
Yes, but good job getting back to where you were.
All right. 7 gigs of audio resulted basically in this. Can you hear it?
We can hear that, yes.
Okay, great. So that was one. And the third. And it all sort of culminated in this.
People fixing the world.
Hello and welcome to People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service. I'm Chavi Sachdev. Today we're heading to Bangladesh, looking at a project that aims to improve the health of workers in the garment industry. These are the people who toil away for very low to manufacture the clothes you might well be wearing right now. It's a project that seems almost too good to be true. And it's taking place behind the gates of one of the hundreds of factories that line the roads on the outskirts of Dhaka. Crowds of women looking for jobs stand outside many of them. It is, after all, the fastest growing sector of the country's economy. This is a factory complex where 6,000 workers make clothing for export for companies like Primark and H&M in the US and the UK. They make. Okay, so you get the idea. So there's all this background sound. Everything from t-shirts and jeans to dress shirts. In the early morning, you see streams of women heading towards different gates and they go inside with their ID cards. Most of the gates are locked, there is security, there's no entry without an ID, and a lot of them have signs outside that say no child labor employed here. Bangladesh is the world's second largest producer of clothing after China. The country's garment factories employ more than 4 million people, the majority women, and clothing exports make up about 20% of Bangladesh's GDP. There are about 800 people working on this floor. There's all kinds of colors, they've all got head coverings. And I've never seen so much plaid in my life. There are industrial sewing machines, button stitchers and hemming machines, folding and ironing teams. Okay, so that's pretty much, that's a lot of sound put together. And these three that you heard in the beginning are incorporated into just the introduction. And you have to be, you could spend so much time tinkering and adding sound. This is not to everybody's taste, capacity, or even interest. So don't, get worried about that. I'm definitely more interested in the interviewing and then the scripting and putting the ideas together than the sound design bit. But other people love it. And so if that's your strength, more power to you. I had professional help on this. I didn't do the mixing myself. I collected all the sound happily, but that's where, my expertise ends. I'm a decent sound engineer, but not quite this accomplished. So once you've collected all the sound, you can also ask your interviewee to describe where they are, as I was in the process of saying. So for instance, this is the same story, the same podcast where we're looking at the factory shop. And I went in with the person who came up with the scheme and set up the shop. And this is what ensued. We're looking around, I asked him to just describe it. And I got
we have these are all washing. So it is a dishwasher. This is cloth washing. Soap. This is hair oils for hair. This is toothpaste. This is mosquito coils, sugar. This is fine.
So I wanted to get a sense of how vast their inventory was. And of course, all of this wasn't played. I mean, I've got actually 2.5 minutes of him just describing stuff. But between conversation, I would say something like, the shop really sells everything. And then, his voice starts up and you play a few seconds of it. And then I'll say, from staples like rice to hair oil, and we'll continue playing his voice in the background, and it just is a nice touch. I mean, I'm obviously involved with this, so I think so. But for scenes and for things like lists, and this is really helps people make pictures in their heads, like they're imagining, oh my gosh, sugar, rice, these are items that they can imagine properly. So ask them, and then if you can't go, they can record it for you. So here's something I got people to record for me on WhatsApp, the voice messaging, the text messaging app, and they've got voice note system on it. And everybody in India uses this. I think in the US, a lot of you use FaceTime, but in my country, everybody's got WhatsApp on their phones. So it's super simple to just tell people to like turn on their phone and hit record. This is soap nuts being crushed. And it's not very evocative on its own, but within a story, it's not a bad thing to include. This is somebody lathering their hands with powdered soap nuts. So, you could make scenes, even if it's not like really detailed. Or you can ask them to make video and with their permission, of course, cut the audio from it. So this is something I did with the BBC Health Check, and we got the doctor to record a video conference that was happening in his room, a consultation, and it was all teleconsultation, very meta, that we recorded the recording and then stripped the audio of it. Oh, it didn't play. Let me try again. Advice. So he uses an app on his computer to facilitate video consultations between patients in his office and specialists in a hospital. In this case, he's connecting a couple with a gynecologist in Delhi. The doctor is visible on the screen, and she's asking about the protein levels in a blood test. Yeah, so this was something he recorded himself and then sent it to me, the doctor, with permission from everybody, and then we used that. You can absolutely use B-roll audio to set a scene. Just talk yourself into it or talk yourself out of it. I think it works really well. So do you want to, so we're going to move into a different segment, so this is a good time to stop. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit about like how you're planning, how you're thinking of doing that? Or what the context is, or your podcast?
You're asking people to type so much early in the morning.
Oh, no, turn on your microphone, please. I mean, you can leave your video.
They can't for this, yeah. They can't actually turn on, only I can turn on the microphones. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Yes, we're making you type so much. Right.
He says he is making a feature for Black History Month, which is why he was asking about the using completely remote to use B-roll. Yeah.
Right. So I'm not sure what setup you've got. I will walk you through a couple of things that I've used, besides just asking people to record themselves. And if you've got something that in mind, feel free to type it into the chat box. I will address it. And maybe other people will have ideas as well. All right, moving on to scripting and structuring. I'll walk you through my processes, and my processes are, mine over many, over almost 20 years of doing this. And it all, of course, starts with the interview. So what I do is make a list of everybody that I have actually talked to when I'm done. So that's 7 gigs of stuff. I did this. So I talked to the guy who started the insurance thing, the factory manager, and the factory director. I made a note here. He was very politically correct and just, was not very evocative, helpful, or interesting because he was just towing the company line. And then I talked to the workers who have insurance. I talked to 5, and then I picked 2, 1 man, 1 woman, because also for not just representation purposes, but they had the strongest stories. And then for the workers who did not have insurance, I chose, they were both women, and they had very compelling stories. One of them, because we were also looking through a gender lens, and I knew that going in, she I didn't know whom I was going to be interviewing until I got there. But once I did, I already knew the angles, so I could choose them better. So this first person, Panna, decided not to have it because it didn't fit her lifestyle. But the second one, really, it was because of patriarchy, and her husband doesn't want her to do the shopping. He doesn't want her to have insurance, and she is sick, like ill, physically unwell. And I felt it was important to highlight that, not as like, guilting people into facing reality, but also to illustrate like how when something is done, it has, these ramifications. And for the people who are benefiting from it, it does work. Then we talked to lots of vox pops and things like that. So I made a list of everything. And then I transcribed the good interviews. So if you're doing it, these are the options that I found. You can use otter.ai, which works really quite well with non-accented English. So this worked great for the factory owner. It worked great for the guy who started the health insurance scheme. And it worked nicely for the sociologist talking about gender, for the labor economist who had a very, very strong Bengali accent. It was absolute gibberish that Otter spit out. And Trent hates it even more. Trent does not even like my accent. And I've got a fairly, understandable accent comparatively. The second option is to transcribe it yourself, which means you listen and you type it all out. I hate this step. I hate it. This is the biggest pain point for me. And there are people who enjoy it. There's somebody I look up to very, very much who I worked with on PRI's The World, who loves transcribing. She will transcribe every word of every interview, print it out, and then go through it old school with the highlighter and choose the good stuff. Not me. And the third option, if you can afford it, is pay someone. So my process is actually to do a combination. I go through Otter. This is Hamid, one of the people I spoke to, and it was fairly decent. And I like timestamps. So my process is I transcribe the interviews first, if it's possible, with timestamps. And then I go through, or you can do it this way, where you have the audio open, and I make the window horizontally. I shrink it, and then I open Word or Google Docs or something in the bottom space and type while I'm listening. And you can also mess with the speed in most audio software. So you can play Hindenburg at 0.7, I think, without making it sound like absolutely nonsense. And then, so I think it was at 0.9x at that time when I was transcribing it. And I put in timestamps. And then after doing it that way, I work out the gold clips. But here are some new tools that work really well for a first pass. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but I thought I'd mention them: Descript and Specs. So you can record through them as well. They are for remote interviews. And then you can you just go in, and if you can use Word or Docs, you can edit sound here. It doesn't work super well for interviews. You can insert sound as well. And at least Chris has used a script, but they don't like Indian accents. So it doesn't always work for my part of the world. This is what it looks like, really. You can like pick up, I think long dashes are long pauses, small dashes are short pauses, and you can cut, copy, paste, move, delete, whatever. And I've highlighted this. That's a really, really good question, because I hate that as a response in any interview, and I always edit it out, especially if I'm the interviewer. Of course, it's a good question because I chose it. So I always take it out. It's a time wasting tactic from your interviewee who is like thinking of what to say. So they're like, oh, that's a really good question. Just eliminate it. So I've highlighted it because that's what you would do. You would take that little scissor icon and get rid of that. So this is what Specs looks like. Oh, sorry, that was Specs. This is Descript. They look really similar, and you can use the same tools on them. I use Hindenburg or Audacity for the final pass on any audio. And what I do is, now that I have my transcript, whether I'm doing it in real time or I've got it through Otter, and then I choose my gold. I go through it I go through the script first because all of us parse text much faster than we can parse audio, right? Audio, if not in real time, at least, I mean, you're going to spend at least 70% of that time listening. You can't really absorb much if you go faster than that. So I listen usually at like 8x or, 0.9x, not slowed down. And then if I want to go a little faster, I can. So I go through it in text, do an auto or a hand done transcript first, and then I go through and I make my clips. So this is a feature of Hindenburg that I really love. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. If you are and you feel like typing, please put it in the chat box. But Hindenburg has a clipboard. And this really, really has changed how I do features. So in my transcript, for example, I can go back and show you, like Professor Hamid, he said this from 1 minute, 32 seconds to 2 minutes, 45 seconds. He was talking about pharmacies being the primary healthcare clinic for most people. They go to a pharmacy instead of a doctor when they're sick. And so in his interview, which is this one, Hamid Professor, from like 1 minute, 32 seconds to 2 minutes, I can just highlight it, copy it, and then pull it here. And there it is. It was 55 seconds long. And the first one in the Hamid clipboard is Hamid Pharmacy. And then I can just bounce it, save it from right here in the clipboard and put it in my hard drive. And I really, really appreciate this feature feature of Hindenburg for making features for myself. And I go through all of the audio like this and pull out the gold clips and then name them and save them. And then this informs my script. So that's my flow. The script is actually not one of the first things I do at all. I organize all my audio, label it, and then transcribe it, and then start pulling out the best stuff. And always have more stuff that I'm going to use because I choose all the good stuff. That sounds nice. And all of you working with audio know that people are not as articulate as they think they are. So people have false starts, people have vocal pauses in the middle. So you want to find that clean and articulate bit and use that. You can do this with any interview you've done, even if you're putting it into narration, which I've had to do a lot of. And it's just the fact that you've done it non-contiguously. You're not running an interview as is. You're going to come in and move their good stuff and intersperse it with your narration. That really makes it a feature. And then if you throw in some nice sound and some scenes, then you are making a sound-rich feature, which is what I'm hoping more and more people will do. So this is what the clips ended up looking like. A lot of clips. I think there were 45 that I selected. And after that, I'm super like process driven. I made folders. So I put the key quotes, the transcription of all the key quotes into its own document, and then made a structure, which I'll show you. The characters, voices, scenes I showed you. I'd already made a list long ago. And then stand-ups, I transcribed them separately in case I was going to use them. So the traditional news structure, if you're coming from journalism, is always like you start with.
We're getting, I'm wondering if we've lost you. We're getting, you seem frozen for the second, and we got a high-pitched sound. Can you speak again?
Yes.
There you go. Okay. Yep, okay. You're good now.
Right. So podcasts, we don't do this, obviously. We're not making news stories. What we're doing is really figuring out a way to sketch these things. And even if it is all based on one person talking or two people, many voices, you want to give everybody a role, set a scene, and then let people who are stakeholders provide you in their words with what matters, but you as a narrator are driving this along. You are shaping it, you are giving context, and basically everything they didn't say very eloquently, you are condensing and putting into your narration. And this is a kind of a structure that most features do follow. You usually have a problem or a issue that needs an intervention or a fix, and then you give the background and you talk about whether this fix is working or not and what should happen next. So rather than, this happened and oh, it happened over here and now it's over, this is what you want to do in a feature. And you also want to try approaches. So for scripts, for me, sometimes it takes a couple of tries. Where do I start? So my first script for the factory insurance was actually about the health issue. I wanted to talk about how if you have time off and you get paid time off, you can go to the doctor. But in Bangladesh, this is not the way it works, is because there is no insurance and a doctor is expensive. And if you are a wage earner, you don't do that. So that's where I started. I got pretty far in this process. And then we decided this was not working so well. It was taking too long to put us in the place we wanted to be. So back to the drawing board, I did a second version, and that's the one you actually heard, where we just went to Bangladesh, went to the garment factory, talked about their lives, and that they're, gave context first, and then set about talking about the problem. And then, so, it took a minute or so to get into it, but we had the time to do it, and we checked with a lot of people, and most people thought this was better. So setting the scene and then providing context, which is that there had been a massive disaster which led to safety protocol being set, and then this need for a description for a solution. And then once the script is final, you record your narration and then mix it up. So you've got different tracks for yourself, for each of the experts, the gold clips you've chosen in your script over here, if you go back. So these are sound effects, and then there's different voices coming in, and those are in bold over here, like this, and this is the name of the clip right here. Hamid Pharmacy, that's the one I showed you earlier. And then you can put it in, and somebody, if not you, somebody will mix it. And then you record your narration, mix it up, and then you let it go. So the more you do, the better you'll get. And one of the options is to do a two-way, which is a hybrid. So I can talk about that if anybody's interested. We've got a little time. And yeah, I think that's my workflow for making features.
That's great. If anyone has a question, they want to put it in the Q&A box or something in the chat.
Yeah. And I'll talk about the two ways while you're thinking about any questions that you want to type up.
Great.
So a two-way is like a hybrid where your host and and two co-hosts are talking, and then you bring in sound and interviews that have been recorded previously. Like the Daily does it a lot. The BBC Health Check does it a lot. BBC Crowd Science does it a lot. PRI's The World does it frequently. So let me give you an example of how this would play out. You're the host of the podcast. I'm your co-host, or I'm a guest, and you're asking me about something. I'm answering you. And then in the middle of it, I can say to you, actually, I spoke to an expert, or I had a conversation with this doctor or this historian or this person who wrote a book earlier, and here's what she had to say. And we've selected that clip already. We've got it ready to go, and we talk around it. So it's us talking like an interview, like a chat or a conversation, but then we've got a third person who's not physically with us, providing a little sound and scene, and then we can have the background that's coming through it. So a recent example I did was about soap making and alternatives to detergent soaps for environmental concerns. And I had spoken to somebody here who's with the soap berries, who's I couldn't go visit. Obviously, there's a pandemic on and everything is restricted. So I asked him to make those recordings of the soap berries and of hand washing. And then I had a conversation with him. And then during our chat for the podcast, I said I'd spoken to him, and then we queued up the audio and mixed it in later. We talked over it, but we mixed it in later, and we had that nice sound of the soap berries and washing while we talked about it, so that it just added a little extra dimension to a show that otherwise would have just been voices and experts talking. So that's one thing you could also try. You have to be careful with rights to using archival material, though. So if you're using news coverage or other things people have said, just make sure you have the rights to use them to add color to your to even in the um, garment factory one, we reference this big collapse of one of those sweatshops. It was international scandal, really, because it really exposed how bad their working conditions were and how unhealthy everybody was. But even though we were using, this was a BBC podcast, and we were using BBC news recordings, there were some that were not cleared for us to use, and we couldn't use them. So you have to check the laws and issues of reusing stuff when you're trying to get clearance for archival footage. So just be careful with that. But it adds so much dimension when you can. Okay, I don't think I see any questions.
Nope, quiet crowd this morning,
right.
but thank you so much.
All right. So, Michelle, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I would say as you are thinking about people that make podcasts a lot, are there any tips that you have that are sort of, down the road as you get into more complicated stuff?
So try having a plan, definitely. I feel like the more you plan, the better your chances of executing something are. And then the second thing is ask for help if you don't understand right away what's happening. So there are 1,000 tutorials out there. A lot of what I've shared with you, I have learned on the go, but I've also had great mentors who have, I've observed them or they've walked me through their processes. And then I've developed these workflows for myself. It doesn't mean they have to apply to anybody, but I do know I will never be hand transcribing any interview from start to finish. That's just not happening.
Yes.
But, if that's your process and that gives you a sense of connection to your material, make it your own. And I'm around. If anybody wants to ever ask me anything, they can hit me up, and I'm happy to help everybody make features. I think everybody should make features and not just do interviews.
That's fantastic. Well, and that's sort of a nice segue into remind anyone who's listening, if you are not participating in the mentorship program with the Podcast Academy, we do invite you to do that. I will put my email in the chat box if you have any questions.
I can put mine too.
Yeah. Boy, my email is so long. But thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who's come today. And we will be putting this up on the website, the recording, at some point next week. So have a lovely weekend, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.